So we're ready to move on to our next panel. And our moderator for that one, I did say to you earlier that each presentation would start with a presentation by our staff. So I fibbed a little bit. In fairness, the woman who will lead the next session was an employee when we started all this, and we planned it and canceled it and planned it. But unfortunately, we were unable to keep her because she is truly a brilliant planner with a really, really bright future. She agreed to continue in her role and show up and do this session for us. For that, I'll be forever grateful, even as she takes up her new duties in the town of Simsbury. So here to talk to you today and lead the session on home field advantages of local affordable housing development is someone we all dearly miss at NVCOG. Please help me welcome back another Valley native, Savannah Nicole Villalba. Savannah?
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. It is my pleasure to be before you all today to discuss the home field advantages of local affordable housing development. It is our hope that by the end of the session, you better understand the local benefits to affordable housing development and the role you can play in fostering development that fits your community and its specific needs. Over the last few years, affordable housing has become a growing area of focus throughout the Naugatuck-Valley region and the state of Connecticut. This focus can be attributed to many factors, including COVID-19 affecting the supply of housing and construction materials, shifts in the labor market, and various housing-related legislative proposals. How many people here have seen these or similar headlines over the last few years? Yeah, I see some hands. Awesome. At the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, this increased focus around housing has engaged the organization with its member municipalities and community partners. This engagement has included assisting Bethlehem and Thomaston with their affordable housing plans and meeting with various organizations that work on housing efforts. The Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments views the increased focus and discussion around housing as a positive for the Naugatuck Valley region. The increased focus has led to many positives, such as community discussion and action through the creation of affordable housing plans, trainings for municipal decision makers and staff hosted by organizations that many of us in this room are members of, okay, it looks like a slide here is missing, but that's okay. And additional policy and data resources to help decision makers and staff make informed decisions. These include, but are not limited to, the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments 2022 Regional Housing Profile, the valuable housing publications from CHAFA, and continued use and attention on Partnership for Strong Communities' yearly housing data profiles. Okay, it looks like 2 slides are missing, but we're gonna roll with it. We're flexible. In being here today, we hope that by hearing how other organizations examine housing from their respective areas of focus, municipal decision makers and staff can gain additional perspective that supports informed decision making. With that being said, there's a lot of terminology used when discussing affordable housing development. If I asked everyone in this room to draw what affordable housing looks like to you, we would all draw very different things. So to ensure that we are on the same page throughout the session, I will quickly cover a few key terms. You've seen this slide already, so now we're here. Housing affordability is housing for which individuals and families pay 30% or less of their income on housing costs. To put this in context for the Naugatuck Valley region, the 2018 median household income was $71,738. For a unit to be considered affordable, a household would not spend more than $1,793 on monthly housing costs. What's included in a housing cost is on the slide before you. To build off of this definition, Affordable housing is housing for which individuals or families pay 30% or less of their income on housing costs, and the unit is supported through a subsidy or an affordability restriction. Affordable housing that includes a subsidy or a restriction is important because this housing ensures support for the region's most vulnerable individuals and families. When an individual or family pays 30% or less of their income on housing costs, and the unit is not subsidized or does not have an affordability restriction, it is often referred to as naturally occurring affordable housing. The Naugatuck+Valley region's housing stock has historically had a strong supply of naturally occurring affordable housing, which has drawn residents to municipalities over the last few decades. However, if the last few years have showed us anything, it serves as an example of how the supply of naturally occurring affordable housing can quickly be impacted by market conditions. When an individual or household pays more than 30% of their income on housing costs, they may have difficulty affording necessities such as food, clothing, transportation, and medical care. This can impact an individual's ability to meaningfully participate in their community. A household or individual is considered cost-burdened if they spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and an individual and household is considered severely cost-burdened if they pay more than 50% of their income on housing. With that being said, the news articles, policy discussions, and data are showing that there is a need for more affordable housing development. I know that this is not the first or the last time that you have all heard this. As stated earlier, one goal of this session is to explain why affordable housing development can benefit your community. I will briefly give a few reasons before our panelists provide their perspectives on this topic. An economic benefit to affordable housing development is that when individuals and households are housed in affordable units, there will be less cost and severely cost-burdened people in your community. This allows individuals and households to have more dollars to spend in your community, including at local businesses that maintain that unique identity of what makes your municipality yours. Additionally, as the region continues to expand job opportunities, there will be a growing need for affordable housing options. By developing affordable housing locally, you can help your businesses maintain local workforces. Affordable housing development can have social benefits for your community's young population. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University studied the impacts of affordable housing development on youth development and found that children in severely cost-burdened households had impacted reading and math abilities. In addition, families who spent 30% or less of their incomes on housing costs spent $75 more per year on child enrichment than families who were severely cost-burdened. The Naugatuck+Valley region has seen housing development over the last decade that has had a variety of environmental benefits. When housing is built near current transit, jobs, and services, individuals and households reap many benefits in addition to the ability of reducing carbon emissions and congestion. The creation of affordable housing options near transit, jobs, and services will be necessary to foster the equitable development of the region. And finally, this conversation isn't just limited to new development. Redevelopment is another way to create housing options that have many environmental benefits. The redevelopment and adaptive reuse of the region's building stock into livable places that highlight a community's history is both an environmental and a social benefit. It is now my honor to introduce our panelists here today. We have David Morgan, the President and CEO of Team Inc., Matt Straub, Senior Program Officer for Lending and Investments of the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and Sean Gio, the Senior Policy Advisor of Partnership for Strong Communities. These panelists really know their stuff, so we should have a fruitful conversation today. And just like the first panel, there will be time for a question and answer session after the discussion, so please feel free to jot down your questions in your eco-friendly notebook provided to you this morning. All right, so our first question today is, from your areas of focus, what do you see as the largest community benefit to affordable housing development? We'll start with David.
Thank you. And, first off, I want to amplify what I heard from Rick Dunn this morning. There's a phrase that many are very familiar with, and it's the idea of nothing about us without us is for us. And for us at team and our board and staff, another way we phrase that is, if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu. And so I appreciate the Naugatuck-Valley Council of Governments, because you take the technical, the infrastructure, and the policy prescriptions, and the idea that you, Savannah Nicole, Desiree Blanchard, Rick Dunn, and all the staff actually carve out that time to work with team to meet residents where they are and create this conversation if we're really going to have solutions. And so what I would really want to amplify is the idea of the process of driving that community dialogue. And another way I'd put it is those most affected by the problem actually have a seat at the table to be meaningfully involved in the solutions and the decisions that affect their lives. So that's team self-interest. And appreciate that you've tapped me to sit in this. I don't know what's more uncomfortable, the lights in my face or this chair I'm sitting in. Anyways, I digress. But, housing is very unique in that, and again, team as a nonprofit, we see more than 15,000 people turn to us across all walks of life. The number, unfortunately, continues to be higher than the month it was in the past. I don't want to geek out on data with you, but, when we see a 20% increase, not just a 2% or a 1%, but a 20% increase in the number of people across all socioeconomic levels turning to team, and I peel that onion and try to understand how could there be a 20% increase compared to a year ago that same month. 60% of the reason is the housing affordability. Too many people turning to team who, to Savannah Nicole's point, when you see people, hardworking people, for each dollar they earn, and they're spending 35 cents to the dollar, 45 cents to the dollar, 55 cents to the dollar, just for the roof over their head, and then what remains for their medicine, their taxes, their health care, food on the table, transportation, it becomes a mission impossible scenario where they're making very difficult decisions that affects themselves, their loved ones, and ultimately the neighborhoods and the communities that we all want to see and build together. Housing is so unique compared, in my opinion, compared to any other, essential quality of life standard, because it uniquely impacts every other standard. And so, when we talk about, I saw some education leaders this morning. Housing policy is education policy. The evidence, the research, and the data is very clear on this. Housing insecurity and its influence, it results in poor attendance for students through the public schools, poor academic performance, increased levels of stress and crises upon kids, students, the families, and the schools, and that whole social fabric already begins to unwind. So housing policy is education policy. A lot of work that the state of Connecticut has done, and in this very region, around social determinants of health and accountable health communities, and the work with Medicare and Medicaid, looking at health-related social needs, and that paradigm shift for healthcare institutions to know that we really need to look at through the social lens of our patients who are turning to us. And the increased likelihood that, based on one's social, economic, environmental background, they foresee an increased likelihood of poor health outcomes and limited access to health insurance and chronic health disease. And again, no surprise, the data is very clear when you look at this over the last 4 years. Right along with food insecurity, housing is the key determinant in influencing overall wellness, population health, when you look through a healthcare lens. And then lastly, I would add, just from an economic development engine, it is not rocket science that, when people have more money in their pocket that they can spend on themselves and their loved ones and their basic needs, and also on local business and the communities that they live and work in, everybody wins. frankly, we're all swimming through this challenge of worker shortage. You know, there's a lot of variables at play here, but, you know, Savannah and Nicole just last week, you know, speaking with a CEO of a major private corporation based right in the NVCOG, more specifically in Seymour, that's responsible for production and U.S. defense systems, screaming, you know, the CEO, David, I've got 8 workers, you know, and to your point earlier about the housing wage, you know, making $21, $22 an hour, 8 different workers coming to me saying, can I borrow against can I pull out my pension? Can I get paid through my vacation? Because I'm trying to get by. That's a real challenge for employers in the private sector and the public sector. Connecticut will sink. I am ever the optimist, and we've made some direction, but all the chickens are coming to roost if we don't solve, number one, the housing supply, which we need more of, and number 2, increased understanding and sensitivity to this thing we call affordable housing, which is rife with stereotypes and stigmas.
Yeah, thank you, David. You got me. Wonderful answer. Sean, Matt, you have anything you want to add to that question?
I think David covered most of what I would have said. I think first I just want to say I grew up in the city, and being on the PAL stage is pretty fun.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. So thank you for the invitation. I think the only thing I'd add is about the health aspects of housing and affordable housing. And when we don't build enough housing in the state, which we aren't, people are really forced to find rentals wherever they can, and homes that really shouldn't be on the market any longer, or really are unrentable in a healthy market, continue to be rented. And there's a lot of health outcomes as a result of that, including hazards from the poor quality of the home, to direct correlation to lead levels in children. And this is a really serious issue in the Valley. Connecticut has some of the oldest housing in the state. And, I remember walking up the back stairs of my grandparents' 3-family right here on East Main, and that building is still there and is unlikely to have been updated in the last 40 years. Those are direct consequences of not building enough new housing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to build off of David's comment as well as the governor's comments earlier about laser welders, one of the things that laser welders, like many of us, need is access to affordable childcare. But if there's not housing that's affordable to early childhood educators, then childcare providers are unable to expand and provide some of those necessary services that help make communities dynamic and help make people able to live, work, and play in their communities. And we see that as an ongoing trend with early childhood educators, in-home health aides, teachers, and other kinds of really vital professionals that make our communities work.
I think that's an important point, Matt, that you're making. It's the people who make our community what it is that support in its systems that aren't able to afford living in their community, and we really need to ensure that they can. So our second question is, what common challenges have you noticed for individuals and households to find affordable housing options?
She direct that at me.
Matt, you wanna?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Were you talking
Sure.
to me?
Yep.
Yeah,
So
sorry. I'm having a little trouble here.
Yeah, no worries. What common challenges have you noticed for individuals and households to find affordable housing options?
Really, I touched on the quality of the housing, but it's really just a lack of supply. I think a lot of folks, once we have our home, if we're homeowners or we're in a stable rental, we don't think much more about the housing market as a marketplace. But it is. It's like any other market, and when we don't have enough supply in the right places, then it becomes a challenge. And that's exactly what's happening in Connecticut, where in the past, job centers were our cities right here in Waterbury, a great one, and a lot of the communities in the Valley. Jobs have migrated out, but the affordable homes have not. So one of the greatest challenges is the lack of supply, and what that does to private market rentals that, as I mentioned earlier, in a healthy market, would be affordable to lower wage workers. But in an environment where we refuse to build homes in many of our communities, the supply is restricted, and of course, the price goes up.
Yeah. David, I want to give you an opportunity to respond before I ask Matt a follow-up.
Yeah, sure. Sean's absolutely right. There's not an adequate supply. We are so far behind, and let's celebrate what we have achieved in moving the needle. But Houston, we have a problem. There's not an adequate supply of affordable housing. And one of my takeaways from the panel earlier, and of course I already forgot the term, but micro-mobility? Yeah. Micro-mobility units, but the power of language. And so, the big proponent, as we bring residents together in government sector together, public-private sector, really the power of how we can change the public narrative, because when we're talking about affordable housing, we're really talking about workforce housing. You heard Matt say it. I mean, we're talking about entry-level public school educators. We're talking about our first responders. We're talking about retail and hospitality workers. We're talking about productionists. Frankly, this is a moral and social and economic obligation to celebrate and embrace and recognize our COVID-19 essential workers who never went home, our childcare workers, et cetera. And, when you were sharing the data about, market rate and spending more than 30%, and to Sean and Matt's point, and granted, this data is always fallen behind. This doesn't, take into regard the very recent times, the ugly realities of inflation. But when you look at fair market rate for a one-bedroom modest unit, you need to be making $22.53 an hour. That's what we're talking about here, as far as when we say affordable housing, or a two-bedroom modest unit, $27 and change an hour. So we need to work on the two things. We need to increase supply, and we need to educate and listen to other individual stories from all walks of life, because we are all, myself included, and so many other caring elected leaders and policymakers and residents, we have been deluged and influenced with these stereotypes and stigmas that have gone on for decades. So when we see or hear affordable housing, it's immediately game over, total division, total paralysis. We can't, build consensus, common ground to really move the needle of what we're talking about. And I have no shortage of stories, but I'll share one and then I'll stop talking. I think about, right before the pandemic, I saw an image of our housing forum, but doing smaller circles within the towns and communities of the NVCOG, and more specifically, this one was at a local church, town of Oxford. And I'll never forget the 79-year-old woman looking me in the eye, Savannah Nicole, saying, "David, I raised my family in Oxford. Husband passed away, the kids are grown up. I love Oxford. And this is not an indictment of Oxford, this is everywhere, okay? I live in this huge, big, oversized house. I can't afford to downsize and stay in the community where I love my partner, I raised my family." To me, that's part of the story of self. The story, the more we can listen to our residents, this idea that it's like us versus them, residents versus policy and government, the more we can break down that silo and hear those individual stories. When we hear, a mother and father with two kids, to Matt's point in the child care, and these impossible choices where they're forced to make choices and cut back on true quality of life standards, like their own personal health care, because of the cost of the roof over their head. We all should be very concerned about that.
Yeah, definitely.
To amplify Dave's point a little bit, while Connecticut's population is relatively stable, household sizes are falling. So there's really a need for more housing choice and housing options for rural and suburban communities in particular, where wide swaths of land are either developed or zoned for single-family housing on large lots that usually tend to be 3 or 4 bedrooms. That's not meeting the needs of broad parts of our community. So we need to be thinking not only about housing stock, but variety within that housing stock, not just more units.
I think that's an excellent point too, but like from the Oxford story, even from a policy prescription perspective, we should all be concerned about an individual, older adult, age 79, and their ability to care for that housing stock. Will it depreciate over time? So even from a policy decision, in addition to hearts and minds, this makes a lot of sense that housing needs to drive every conversation in anything NVCOG is doing.
Sure, awesome. So Matt, to follow up, what common challenges do you feel that developers are facing that are preventing them from building more affordable housing options?
One of the big things we see is a lack of development parcels that are already approved for multifamily housing or even more density than large lots. So broadly speaking, what developers are trying to do is to avoid risk. So they're not trying to come into a parcel that's zoned for 4 large houses and come in and build apartments, because there's too many opportunities there where they could get sued by a neighbor, where approvals wouldn't be allowed, because all of those pre-development expenses, so things like engineers, architects, surveyors, all of that would need to be put out in advance of being able to build anything. So if you don't have an approved parcel, they're not even going to come in and look in your community. So that's really something where towns can have a lot of impact, is by planning for affordable housing so that a developer can come in and provide that service.
Sure, great. So I'm hearing that coordinated community buy-in is important for the creation of affordable housing development. And I'd love to hear, what do you feel that effective community buy-in looks like? And I want to also ask David to chime in on this question, because I feel that the all-in chapters that team is working on is a great example of how that's starting in this region.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to preface a couple of things that I am ever the optimist, and that's not just on faith or on a whim. I know a lot of the chief elected officials of the NVCOG who really carve out the time to listen and understand the complexity of housing, and above all the other things impacting and bearing down on the backs of all of their constituents, all their residents, including and not including the electorate. And that gives me great optimism that we have great, good people who really want to make a difference. And they want to be responsive to their residents and their concerns and their fears. And I would also underscore, it is not irrational for people to be concerned or have fears about what is impacting their housing situation, or who or what is getting built near my home. It is, as I often say, it's the largest check they write in their life. And so I think we have to, in such a polarized world where it's really hard to have a public discourse that's productive, that we should always step back, and it is not irrational for people to have questions. And so to your question, the idea of creating the conditions for the stories to be heard, building, team is deeply committed to that, what I call relational infrastructure. And so how do we get residents in the same spaces with organizations, institutions, for-profit, not-for-profit, policymakers, elected officials, in a very inclusive way where it's people of all backgrounds, religions, sexual orientation, genders, colors, political yes, all different political affiliations, to come together. And again, for me, the two most things that matter most, number one, increased housing supply, and number two, increased understanding and sensitivity to this thing we call affordable housing. And you can't do that until you get everybody into the space. And so what TEAM does as a very grassroots, frontline human services nonprofit is we create those conditions. So having planning and zoning watch parties, having community dinners, and asking our elected officials to come and, we give them 2 minutes and then we kick them off the microphone and break bread together, and they get to meet some residents and get to hear, again, their stories. And the more, and residents getting to meet other residents actually in person, not through Twitter, not through Facebook, but actually having a conversation and, again, hearing one another's stories. And the whole idea is the story. So when we put together the story of self, we create the story of us and the story of now, the sense of urgency. And so how can we write that next chapter together? And that sounds very kumbaya, but my point is increasing the supply of affordable housing. We have decades of stigma and stereotypes, I'm going to keep saying it, that is creating real barriers to this. And this is very doable, but the only way is to get everybody, Savannah and Nicole, in that space together. So and team, you know, when we walk, it's hard to do this on a panel, but we are deeply committed to this and creating those circles and those opportunities for those stories to be heard, and then building those policy prescriptions and advancing housing supply.
Sure. What I'm hearing is when we break bread and we demystify the human aspects of housing, it can really make a difference on community input when that application comes and when our decision makers are at that point of deciding how is this going to move forward. Matt or Sean, do you have anything to add, maybe more from the land use side or the technical side of what really gets that development to the table? What good community buy-in looks like when a project has gone well?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that LISC does is a community development finance institution and a technical assistance provider is work with communities directly, with local volunteer groups. The affordable housing planning process, I think, has been really instrumental in that because it's created opportunities for community meetings and interested groups of volunteers to really amplify the need for affordable housing, or maybe that conversation hadn't been happening in that community beforehand, or whether some loud voices that were opposed to new development, new multifamily development, or affordable development really kind of dominated the conversation. So what we're doing is working with these volunteer groups to build the capacity and build the network of people in town who do think that that's really important, to create town-based groups. So what we find is that regionalism is great, but people are really trusting of the people in their community, and they're the ones who really have those networks who are able to make those kinds of one-on-one pitches for why more affordable housing is necessary in those communities. So sometimes those groups eventually can incorporate into a nonprofit and advance their own affordable housing projects, or they can partner with someone who brings those technical skills in. So there's a lot of different opportunities, but really we see the affordable housing planning process as the base that helps kind of lift all of that up. So
Matt's absolutely right. I think the more towns can plan for where they want housing, what they want it to look like, where they want housing growth, how they can support that, support affordable housing through the planning process. But I want to back up and give a little context that hopefully at a regional forum will be recognized and accepted, is that state law says that the municipalities have a responsibility to plan for and provide for the housing needs of the region, their planning region, not for their individual municipalities. And I think that is news to most people involved or in housing planning, whether it's a planning commissioner or someone showing up at a planning commission hearing. Unfortunately, our planning processes are, because they're local, the folks that actually need most of this housing are not going to be in the audience, because most of, zoning is really, our local zoning regime is really a historical blip in our history in Connecticut. And if you look to any of our communities, most of the places that we love about our community, that we treasure, they're mostly pre-zoning. And they're environments that, the previous session talking about transportation, they're environments that were walkable, and they may not be any longer. They had a diversity of uses, not just acre upon acre of single-family homes and large lots. This experiment we've been under for the last 70 years or so failed. And what we ended up with is a segregated state that's too expensive for most of us to live in. And unfortunately, our planning processes, because they're local, it's hard to figure out how to get out of that. But the truth is, every town has a responsibility to provide for, this is the law, a diversity of housing types that are also available to lower and moderate income households in their region. Towns have to learn how to plan to accept that reality.
Yeah. Question 3, and I'm going to throw it back to Sean. What do you see as the largest impediment to the creation of more affordable housing development?
Yeah, I think some of what I just said, I think, is a big impediment, which is resistance, local resistance. But taking a step back, it's from maybe a developer's perspective, I think, and Matt can speak more to this, it's generally time. So if it's difficult to find the site, and that can be related to many conditions, but partially to the openness of a community. If it's difficult to find a site, difficult to get local approvals, difficult to find financing, time is the enemy of housing development. So it is all, that reality is often cleverly used to try to prevent housing development, whether it's affordable housing or otherwise. If a town really wants to encourage affordable housing development or housing development in general, some of the things that are within their control are those permitting processes to zone for denser housing and different types of housing types where you want to see it in your community, and make that the most attractive place to attract that kind of housing. Some communities do more. They may create a local housing trust. I'm not sure if there's any in your region. It's something I see a lot more in Fairfield County. Some direct some of their federal resources, some of Commonwealth's community development, block grant money towards to support housing development and infrastructure needed for that development. Those are things that communities can do proactively to shorten some of that time horizon so that more of this housing actually gets built.
Awesome. And Matt and David, I want to hear your perspectives on the impediments as well, but I want to ask Sean a follow-up question. So if a community wants to support the development of more affordable housing or multifamily units, what level of permitting, so from a local land use regulatory level, by right, site plan, special use permit, best supports the most development?
Best supports the development? Yeah, what I would say is for many of your communities, if there's a subdivided lot and I want to build a single family home on it, the permitting process is probably pretty straightforward. So I would challenge you to ask yourselves what level of housing development that is not a single family home on a large lot deserves that same kind of permitting process. And because it's very unlikely, in most communities there's been some really good research over the last couple of years around all of our zoning, and I live in Cheshire now, and Cheshire is a prime example of this. It's very difficult to build anything other than that single family home on a large lot. That's what we get. That does not help people either not in a position to buy a home or don't care to buy a home, don't have the income that would prefer to rent. So my challenge would be, where in town can you accept a lower level of permitting, whether it's site plan review or by right for multifamily housing? You have to do it. This is not about, something that, as I said, this is required by Section 8-2, the Zoning Enabling Statute. Zoning, and I just would like to get across that zoning, I hear a lot in my career, and I know Matt does too, about local control of zoning. Local control of zoning is granted by the state. If you don't believe me, you can go read Section 8-2. The state gives certain limited powers to towns to control their development in a town. It is a state power, not a local power. So I say to you, build the housing that your community needs, because powers that are granted are powers that could be modified. Section 8-2 has been modified many, many times over the last, since its inception. And it was recently as a couple of years ago. And in those efforts, folks that need affordable housing, need lower cost housing, are going to continue to advocate for increased housing development in communities across the state.
Yeah, and I just will add that the CEOs received a policy briefing about Public Act 2129 that revised Connecticut General Statutes H-2. So everyone had seen that at some point over the last year. So Matt and David, would you like to add any impediments that come to mind?
Yeah, by right zoning is the gold standard for being able to bring in developers. And I think Sean's point about getting what you zone for and what you plan for is really important, because the way to really supplement by right zoning is through robust design guidelines. A lot of, I think, what really scares people about affordable housing is their familiarity with like 1960s style public housing. It's big, it's brick, it's ugly, it will detract from my property values. And that's where robust design guidelines can make the development process a lot more collaborative. Because you can say that you're going to have by right zoning, but you can also account for bulk. You can account for building materials. You can say that you want something in a certain kind of natural building material or with a pitched roof, so that it fits within the physical characteristics of your community while still bringing in new housing choice and housing options. And that's a way to really kind of square that circle a little bit, so that you're making things easy while still planning for what it is that you want things to look like.
Sure. And a follow-up to that, I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, Partnership for Strong Communities has a wonderful publication on small multifamily unit housing and the benefits of that. And so in this region, we do see a lot of duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, so 2 to 4 unit housing options. So many communities have concerns such as traffic or public utilities around higher density development. In your experience, and this is for anyone, generally speaking, do 2 to 4 unit developments, so these smaller multifamily unit developments, warrant the same level of concern as these higher level units, so we'll say more than 10 units?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of that?
Sure. So we have a lot of small multifamily housing in this region, and that is also a way to create more affordable housing that scales properly, to Matt's point. So when a community is concerned about public infrastructure or traffic or the concerns that fall within their purview as a zoning commission, do you feel that those smaller multifamily units warrant the same level of concern as higher level or higher density affordable housing that we've seen in the 60s and we do still see today? But
yeah, sure, thanks. And I should have said in the beginning, I'm hearing impaired. My hearing aids broke, so and the acoustics up here are awful. So I apologize if I'm struggling a little. But yes, I think first I'd like to go back to planning, right?
Sure.
If a community knows where it wants to see growth, the best thing to do is to drive the developers there, and what they want to see there, make that the easiest thing to build there, and support it in any way you can, whether it's direct financial, being part of a deal, using a town-owned site, infrastructure to support it. But to answer your question more directly, in all of our communities, even the smallest ones, we have centers with small multifamily homes, either 3-family homes that we see tons of here in Waterbury, rentals above stores on Main Street and village centers. This is a traditional Connecticut form, and I think so. One is, it's a lot easier to imagine your village center, your town center, growing a little in that form, and those homes are going to be more affordable than a single-family home on that lot. Whether you're dividing the land cost by 2, say for a duplex, you're dividing the land cost by 3 for a triplex, and so on and so on. You're often, those kinds of properties are built by local builders. You don't need to find a large developer who can handle the sophisticated financing and got engineering and got all that other stuff, right, Matt, that the big developers need to know in order to manage a big development. So I would say there's a place for the smaller family, multifamily homes in the state. And honestly, if you look at where most lower or moderate income renters live, they do not live in big multifamily apartment buildings in the state. They live in 3 to 4 family homes. That's been the Connecticut way for 100 years, and it continues to be the Connecticut way.
Perfect.
Yeah, you think about a two to four family home, that could be 3,000 square feet. That's smaller than some new construction single family homes. So the idea that it should be subject to some higher level of review than a similarly sized structure that might cost $700,000 and house one family, I think just on its face doesn't make a lot of sense.
David, I want to give you an opportunity to reply to the impediments before we move on to our final question.
Yeah, thank you. Again, repetition is the mother of learning, and this isn't where you just do one, town hall convening in a local community. Again, even just listening about zoning regulations and laws and land use restrictions, again, I make the argument that, there's always the veil of zoning complexities and land use restrictions. Meanwhile, as we hold the mirror up to our region and our towns and cities, it is not getting better. It is getting worse. And I am ever the optimist, but it continues to skew along racial, ethnic, and other lines. And there's others far more qualified and appropriate to speak to that than myself or any of us on this panel. But at what point do we hold the mirror to all of ourselves and say we've got to recalibrate and change the way we connect within towns and neighborhoods, and no town should be told what to do or told what its solution should be. If I planned a gathering in my home, I don't know how happy I'd feel if you guys came over and you rearranged my furniture. It really needs to come from within the community. And again, when you listen to employers from the private sector, for-profit sector, there's a real growing understanding of a problem we have here. Employers, making unprecedented increases across compensation, yet still seeing their workers struggling. And the key headliner is what they're paying for the roof over their heads. So we've got to continue to do these local convenings where you get employers. I challenge you to reach out to your chamber leaders and your businesses throughout the various circles throughout the NBCOG to listen to the employers, because it's real. I mean, I'm hearing it all the time, again, across the entire socioeconomic ladder. And it's the most complicated issue, housing affordability. And so we've got to bring these circles together over and over and over and start to increase the understanding, increase the sensitivity to it, and ultimately increase the housing supply.
So our last question is, the path forward to strengthen our communities through the development of affordable housing options will require collaboration. We've heard today that developers are involved, our decision makers are involved, we need our CEOs, we need our communities, we need a lot of people to create more affordable housing development. How can municipalities, how can CEOs in this room, the land use commissioners, best lead the way forward?
There's a lot of things municipalities can do. We've talked a lot about planning and zoning already, so I wanted to pivot a little bit to a couple of other things that municipalities need to have as part of their toolkit. The first being the provision of town-owned land. There's a lot of municipalities that own either small infill parcels or parcels in their town centers that might be great candidates for affordable housing. And because they already own them, they can put together RFPs that really allow for them to seek something very specific, so they can be very clear about the kinds of housing, the affordability of that housing, and what that structure might look like. The other opportunity that municipalities have is municipal tax abatements. So a lot of people don't know this, but affordable housing development in the state of Connecticut is taxed as regular residential housing. So the state offers the ability for municipalities to offer tax abatements, but it doesn't mandate it. So, affordable housing is expensive to operate in Connecticut. It can frequently cost upwards of $8,000 per unit per year to sustainably operate one affordable housing unit. And one of the ways that municipalities can make that more affordable is by reducing the property tax burden on those units.
Can I build on one thing Matt said? Just first, Matt was talking about how affordable housing not being that image many of us have of towers, or the projects, as people like to say. Almost all of these developments are actually what's called mixed income, and generally, depending on the financing, they may be a third affordable sort of income restricted units, a half. It could be 100%, but in my experience, that's not very common. So I just want to give that context. And these are tax, like Matt said, they generate tax revenues and productive properties from a tax revenue perspective. One of the other things that land, I think I just want to agree with Matt about land acquisition is becoming more and more and more of an issue in our state, finding the right sites in the right places, sites that actually work for development. Municipal land is great. State land, look to what parcels in your municipality are owned by the state. They could actually be surplus. The state has a process for managing surplus state land, and affordable housing is part of that process. The other thing is, your communities best. I've seen, and Matt, maybe you too, there's a lot of faith communities, church property, that their needs have changed a lot over the years. And some of our communities, going way back to our settlement from European settlers, were really based around churches, right? And these churches have changed a lot, and often the church is quite a landholder, and often it's in the center of your town. And they can be having conversations with church leaders, faith leaders in your community about that land could be a great, they're often cited in just where you'd want to have some more housing. They're often in that walkable part of your community. And the last thing I'd say, what can municipalities do? The best lead the way forward. There's research that shows, and many of you, this might feel right too, anecdotally, that the folks that turn up at your local commission meetings to oppose housing, or maybe really anything, they're not necessarily representative of your community or the larger region. And what I mean by that is there's lots of research that demonstrates that they are older, whiter, and more likely to be men and more likely to be homeowners. And that group, of which I guess I'm one of those, is certainly, I'm here, so we exist, but there's a lot of other people who live in your community that do not have the time or ability or even aware of these hearings that you may never hear from just from the commission's public hearings in that setting. So I think one of the things municipalities can do is really take seriously community engagement, like David was talking about, to really look to who needs the housing in your community and outside of your direct community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add, our municipal leaders continue to, and if not even amplify and turn the meter up, be champions for affordable housing, and don't feel like the world is on your back as the leader. You have a growing body of residents and those most affected by these issues. We have dads with their 25-year-old daughter in a community he loves in Derby, and she can't get out of dad's home because there's no option out there. More and more people it's hitting them right in their home, and there's it doesn't, Republicans, Democrats, and you're not alone. The more we can create those conditions where individual stories and people, and listen to our employers in the public and private sector, will actually move the needle. A great way the variation could be, as one who was once on a P&Z outside of NBCOG, where we can have go from a time where what we see now is maybe the land use lawyer shows up at the P&Z meeting, and then if you really create the relational infrastructure, and we begin with the end in mind, the idea that 45 people show up for a P&Z meeting, who all have the shared story. Again, our child care workers, our social workers, our mental health counselors, our school teachers, our first responders. You get the idea. And I said it before, I'm going to say it again. Repetition is the mother of learning. You've got to hold those local groups with all those multiple sectors and residents to continue to show images of what affordable housing looks like. It is all over the Connecticut. That's why I'm so optimistic about it. The images in Guilford, Old Saybrook, Avon, Stonington, that's affordable housing, and it can be done. And it's how you engage your full community. And all the different myths. There's no shortage of research and anecdotal evidence, because the myths about, well, it increases crime, it hikes school costs, not true, not true. And you can even, I heard Rick talking about the Waterbury branch line and the commitment to that. There's real evidence around, when you live within a half mile of reliable transit, your transportation cost goes down from 19% to 9%. So at a point where I was paying 32% for the roof over my head, 19% for transportation, and a reliable mass transit on this Waterbury branch line goes from 10 to 9%, guess where that 10% can go? Can help with my own quality of life. It can help with local merchants, small business, employers. We can retain workers who live there, people coming to our employers. It makes a lot of sense. So Rick Dunn is absolutely right. He might be biased, but he's absolutely right. There is no greater potential than the NVCOG on what we're talking about. But you don't learn these things, and you don't talk about them, and you don't hear people's stories if you don't get them in the same damn room together, where it's just us, them, government, residents, and not in my backyard stuff. So I would walk away saying, team, we are deeply committed to creating those conditions for those stories to be heard. Elected officials are not alone, and people are starving to do this and co-create that.
Thank you. So thank you very much to the panel and to SN. We're actually going to go to audience questions for the panelists. So if anyone here has a question for any of the panelists, Karen, I think we have one down front here.
Good morning. I guess it's still good morning. I'm Tia Barnes. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant here in the state. And so my concern is speaking to, I think it was Sean who made a statement about a lot of the people who are showing up at hearings are white men. And we really need to do more to educate all of our communities about diversity, about what people are and look like, and expanding on the knowledge that we have of each other to mitigate some of those biases, right? So I really feel like the barriers to housing or expanding on affordable housing is steeped in bias and classism and racism. So my question is, do we have in all of our 19 municipalities affordable housing units? Does that exist in every one of our 19 municipalities?
Yeah.
They do, yes, to some degree. Is there enough? No.
Correct.
Right? Our affordable, under the definition the state uses, affordable housing is incredibly concentrated in the cities in the state. For instance, Hartford, that one I have memorized. I don't have Waterbury's memorized. 40% of the housing stock in Hartford is affordable according to the state. But then many of suburban communities, it would be more typically, the range would be 1 to 3%, I would say.
Aaron, do you have someone? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm from Milford. I'm actually from the All In for Milford group. I'm here thanks to the invitation by Team Inc. Appreciate you. I have 3 sections to my comment. I have testimony, I have an invitation, and I have a question. So to start, my testimony is that in my time organizing with lots of people here through All In for, with team support, All In for Milford, and the other All In for Milford, All In groups, other towns, I participated in these community meals, in these planning and zoning watch parties. I have to say, I'm kind of proud that I thought of that. And I agree, like especially for planning and zoning, they are not used to having support in the room. They hear the 10 people in town who are angry about something. They don't hear the people who are okay with what they're doing. So we want to change that. At the community meals we are having, we have so many different people, and our goal is to have everyone at the table. And I appreciate the question before. In Milford, we need to work harder, way harder, because we're 96% white. But there are a lot of people whose voices aren't being heard, and we need to change that, for sure. That's one of our goals. So at these meals, we have Democrats, Republicans, municipal leaders, people with and without housing, and that is the hard part. The people without housing, it's hard for them to participate in Zoom meetings. You know, they have so much going on. Everyone has so much going on, but they have extra on their plate. Or if they're working 2-3 jobs to try to just survive, how can they come to a community gathering, a meeting, a Zoom meeting, organize with us? So that makes our challenge even harder, and that's why we need more help, right? We've got Team Inc. helping. So my testimony was there about how it's been really great. We want to continue this. It's tough to sustain with just volunteers. My invitation is I'm looking around going, look at all these people, I don't know them yet. Okay, so when we have lunch today, I went and checked out. It's box lunches, and I'm sure we're not allowed to eat on in these nice seats. So we're going to be standing around out there, awkwardly holding our sandwiches and trying to eat without spilling our food on our clothes.
Actually, you're all going to be allowed to bring your lunches in
Oh,
and
we are?
eat in here. There will be some programming.
Oh.
I do need to ask you to
I'll wrap
come
it
to a
up.
question,
I'll wrap it up.
please.
There is a question. Okay, so that invitation was, let's figure out a way to talk with each other while we're eating these lunches, okay? The All In folks will let you know where we are.
Great.
Come see us. Come chat with us. Let's share some stories. Questions. What support do Team and its community partners need to increase people's understanding so we can keep building these connections? We need more. How can governments help? You addressed some of that, but how can funders help? We're volunteers. We can't sustain this all with just volunteers. And how can other local resources help? Team is great. We need more support.
Matt or Sean, David, anybody want to take
Thank
that
you.
one? Thank you.
I'll say first, and then maybe Matt and David could be more constructive. But the first thing I want to say is, first of all, congratulations on being so engaged. It's hard. It's really hard. I don't do it myself in my own community. I'm too busy, right? But the other thing I want to say is reaching out, outreach, building community, those are absolutely critical to moving forward and getting housing created. But and I think Matt and David could talk more about that because they both have tons of experience in that, and so do I. But what I want to say is advocates, people that need this housing, they're tired of it only being conversations. The housing has been needed for generations. Conditions are getting worse. The governor talked about inflation. The largest source of inflation are increases in home costs, whether it's purchases or rents. They're skyrocketing. So we do need to talk, but it's insufficient. We need to build housing.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, gentlemen. My name is Aaliyah Miller. I'm from a fellow COG up in Hartford, CROG. I wanted to get your insights on who's doing it well. We've heard a lot of vivid pictures of where the struggles are, where the work needs to be done. Can you share a story about a community, maybe not in Connecticut, but maybe nationally, that you've heard of that's trying to get it right? And is that a model that we could look at? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll toot Matt's horn. I'll let Matt talk about LISC. LISC, I'm not unbiased. I used to work for LISC. LISC knows how to engage the communities, and I bet you have lots of great examples.
Sure. So as I mentioned, for 16 years, LISC administered a program called Housing Connections on behalf of the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, where we worked with individuals and local communities who are looking to advance affordable housing opportunities specifically in their town. So they were able to do so in a number of ways. So whether that was through the provision of an affordable housing trust or other nonprofit group, or working to bring in a partner. So Connecticut has a robust ecosystem of community development corporations, or CDCs, who specialize in the development of affordable and mixed income housing. So having that kind of entrance through a partnership with a local group really helps make the affordable development process move a lot easier, because you can rely on that local group to do some of that messaging and some of that outreach and build trust. So it's not just someone from Hartford coming in and looking to build something in Shelton. It's someone in Shelton bringing in a partner to build that technical expertise so that it meets the needs of the people in Shelton. And I just used Shelton as an example. That was just the first name that came in. But there's lots of great examples of communities who are using their funding apparatuses and their town land to be able to leverage those resources to be able to make these developments happen.
I would also just understand, the Naugatuck-Valley Council of Governments did a housing profile covering all 19 towns and cities, and if you haven't seen it, it came out around January. Highly recommend you look at it, because you can see very clearly the data across the 19 towns and cities, and tells the broader story of Connecticut. And again, we are so far behind on having adequate workforce housing, affordable housing supply for people. And so when you see some of that data, it's pretty staggering. And I wanted to acknowledge the first question from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion facilitator. There was a fourth chair here. I wish you were actually sitting up here, because you could really speak. Because one headliner, I'm getting nervous. You should be doing this, not me. But housing inequity is inextricably linked to racial inequity. You can't talk about one without the other. And so that really has to be amplified. And so, even just looking at current trends, where we saw the hiking in the housing prices, which was pushing people out of the housing market and into the rental market. And guess what? The poor people always get the crap end of the stick. And so it bears down, and that skewing disparity, including across racial and ethnic lines, is worsening because of even that latest condition around the housing market, and team is seeing too many people every day. That's it. That's all I got to say about that.
Thank you. We're running low on time, but I think we have one more question.
Hi, can you understand me with my mask accent?
Yep, you're just fine.
Okay. This is Sharon, and I represent the Southbury Affordable Housing Alliance. I'm wondering, there are only 6 of us on our board, and we have about 3 advisors. We sort of feel like little David up against Goliath, with the lack of affordable housing and some of the NIMBYs in town. We don't know how many there are, but I may have been hopefully listening or selectively listening, but I could have sworn that one of you said that the NV COG would be willing to help with community, maybe if we were needing help with arranging a community dinner or some such a communal conversation about affordable housing. Is that something you do help with, or did I just fantasize this.
No, you didn't fantasize. We can't provide a dinner, but what we can do is facilitate conversations in your community. So if that's something you're interested in, you can certainly reach out to us. I will confess, we're about 5 people shy on staff right now. We're hiring. Any planners out there? We have plenty of jobs open right now. But yes, we can assist in facilitating community meetings at your request. We have one more? I can take one more question, and then we really have to get moving.
Sorry, I'm gonna cut to the quick.
Sure.
My name is Rachel May Foster. I'm a housing counselor here at Housing Services of Waterbury, and I hear a lot about making plans for building affordable housing, making it more available. Sometimes it's easier in the municipalities than it is in the suburban areas, but is there a plan to have a coordination of services where those who go into the affordable housing have the education and information they need to be able to sustain that?
David, you want to talk about supportive services, supportive housing?
Sure. From the actual resident perspective? Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. So, and it's interesting, the vice chair of the NVCOG, Mayor Mark Loretti, City of Shelton, we were just talking in between about too many people coming to team from Shelton and many other communities. And as he acknowledged and articulated really well, it's a rising problem, the affordability crisis. And he is very concerned. And again, he is committed to being the mayor of all the residents of Shelton. And to your point, one of the things that our elected officials know that entities like TEAM, and I know all of you at Neighborhood Housing do very well, is that it isn't just, blind relief giving. It's not, the idea, okay, how far behind are you, or do you need a security deposit? And I want to touch on that real fast, connected to supply. But progress moves at the speed of trust. If anybody has ever had the feeling of needing help and needing to depend on something beyond oneself or their family unit, it's a feeling that you have to walk it to really even be able to understand what I'm trying to describe there. And so there's an art and science of care management and case management. And part of it, of what I believe TEAM does really well in the public sector, send too many people to TEAM, frankly, but our ability to respond to is because we look under the hood of their situation and we give the tough love. We in other words, if we were able to provide some rental relief or mortgage relief, if the data is clear based on expenses in and expenses out and revenue in, you're just going to come back in 30 or 60 days. There's an art and science to do that. And so having that street credit and that credibility as an organization like TEAM and Neighborhood Housing is really important, because you're literally just throwing resources down the toilet and you're just buying 30 days or 60 days. And so that holistic approach, it has to be paramount. It has to be a core value of an organization that's responding to housing insecurity. Another way I would phrase it is if somebody came into TEAM or was referred to TEAM and they're struggling with, adequate assured access to food on a daily basis, rather than just providing food vouchers, we could agree that there might be other things going on underneath the iceberg. So what's going on with housing, transportation, healthcare access, childcare if they have children, et cetera. And so we have to take that holistic approach in partnering and meeting people where they're at and truly casting no judgments and empowering them and then getting out of their way and seeing them succeed and thrive. And so I think that's really important as far as that art and science of not just, because we're not getting enough resources to be able to address the housing inaffordability, to help subsidize and address arrearages. The second thing to that, and I'll stop talking, is as I said to Mayor Loretti, and I've said it to others, we have security deposit resources at TEAM. We have street credit with landlords and mediation when they know TEAM's involved, and we can find a pathway to sustainability and stability for that household. Problem is, can't find any units anymore. Just can't find them. Yeah. And from my own vantage point at TEAM, what really wakes me up at night is the staff at TEAM are the last line. Caring, exceptional caseworkers and support specialists who are the last line, looking in the eye of a mother, a single older adult, a young Gen Z who is in real stress, and we can't find a place for them because there's no supply. So it doesn't even matter that we have the security deposit. It doesn't matter that we can do a mediation or find, because there's no units. And that's why when you look at that NBCOG report, all of us should be alarmed about Houston, we have a problem. But I know our elected officials agree. They just can't solve it by themselves. We need everybody. That's my common theme here. We got to get everybody in the same space to address that.
And that's going to have to be the last word on this session today. I appreciate it. A big hand for our panelists, David, Matt, and Sean. And a big thanks to Savannah Nicole for showing up and helping us out today. I really appreciate that.